As we discussed in the previous lesson, the killing of Archduke Franz Ferdinand is what started World War I. He was killed alongside his wife Sophie while touring in Bosnia-Herzegovina. He was shot by a pistol and killed instantly. There was a lot of discussion about why he was there, as there was a lot of tension going on at the time between the two countries and between a lot of other countries throughout Europe. We talked about Gabriel Princip in the last lesson as well. He is the man who killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand. His life was pretty terrible after the killing of Archduke. From there, he would go to jail where he would try to attempt suicide twice. He would take a cyanide pill and then it would not work. He would try and shoot himself and it didn't work, and eventually he would just die of natural causes, weighing only about 80 pounds. Just to look at a brief review, we have the Triple Alliance, which was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. They had a long alliance which was already standing, and after the killing of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Germany had to back Austria-Hungary, and war was declared between all these different countries. For the Triple Entente, we had Great Britain, Russia, and France. We also talked about how the Germans were fighting a two-front war, with the French and Russians on the side, but we didn't talk about how the Great Britain had a very strong navy, which was just keeping Germany from getting supplies. The Germans had to do something about this, and it created one of the most deadly things of World War I and World War II. The machine that they created was the U-boat. The U-boat was a submarine that was pretty much undetectable at the time, and the Germans were not scared to just blow up ships. They were really patrolling the waters and letting people know that they were there and that they had a very strong and powerful weapon. The U-boat became a lot bigger problem for the U.S., as we will discuss later on in the lesson. From there, we'll take a look real quick to refresh on trench warfare, coming all the way from no man's land back to the HQ dugout, where they would devise plans and the sleeping headquarters were. These trenches were a very terrible place, as there was rats the size of cats living within and just eating nothing but terrible food. The country that had it the worst were the Russians. The Russians were in a very cold country, poor country, and underdeveloped. They weren't as developed as the French, Germans, the British, or the Americans, and this caused a lot of problems, as they were pretty much just sending some farmers up to the front lines with nothing but pickaxes and hoes to do battle with. The Russians were very underdeveloped and pretty much willing to take anyone, as the picture shows. A lot of times the Russians were told to go to the front lines, wait till the person next to them got shot, then start shooting. Sides definitely changed during World War II, including Italy, who would eventually switch over to the Allies, and US joining, along with Japan, who also joined the Allies. The United States would finally get involved in the war when the Germans sent messages over to Mexico telling them to invade the US, thus starting a war on the US soil. Fortunately for us, this didn't work. This was called the Zimmerman Note at the time, and luckily it was detected and stolen by US intelligence. The sinking of the Lusitania is going to be one of the main points of the rest of this topic, as we'll talk about yellow journalism and how the United States may have sunk this ship just to get the support they needed to join World War I and get the backing of all the citizens to do things such as victory gardens and for women to take over the jobs of these men that had to go to war. Here's a prime example of yellow journalism as we take a look at a paper back from when the USS Maine was sunk outside of Cuba. Another very good example of yellow journalism. The USS Maine was sitting outside of Cuba when a mine blew up the ship, killing hundreds of Americans. Now, this was never confirmed. It was only sought to be true, and it would eventually start the U.S.-Spanish War. Another example we have of conspiracy within the U.S. government is the Bay of Pigs, as JFK sent fake Cuban residents down there to try and start a revolution. It was quickly caught by the Cuban government and ended, and it was a very bad thing on JFK's record. Continuing with JFK, his assassination is maybe the biggest example of conspiracy in the U.S. government. 7 days before JFK was assassinated, he said this quote, "There's a plot in this country to enslave every man, woman, and child. Before I leave this high and noble office, I intend to expose this plot." Clearly, the U.S. government did not want him to expose that plot. The moon landing is another good example of a possible conspiracy. There's a lot of things that people have taken a look at that they just don't believe is possible, such as the flag waving and even possibly the reflection in the astronaut's helmet. And last but not least, September 11th, 2001. Obviously, this can offend some people saying it is a conspiracy. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy, but a lot of people do think it. From here, I just want you guys to pick one of these theories and either tell me why or why not you support that theory.